The toxic wind of Osiris 7 cut across the wreckage like a blade, carrying the hiss of chemical storms and the faint, metallic stench of death. Ravik Thorn pushed himself out from under the bent hull of his transport, hands slipping on the scorched metal as acidic rain traced burning lines down his forearms. His visor was cracked. Through the fractured lens, the desert stretched endlessly, a sea of ochre dust under a sickly green sky. Once, this had been the jewel of the trade routes, a hub where freighters from 100 worlds docked and merchants shouted over each other in a dozen tongues. Now it was a carcass, picked clean by the swarm. Every joint screamed in protest as he staggered upright. His armor's filters whined, struggling against the tainted air. Around him lay the remains of his crew. Those who hadn't been reduced to ash were little more than blackened silhouettes, burned into the sand. Above, dark shapes wheeled in the clouds, scouts of the insectoid empire, circling like vultures waiting for the last breath. A shadow moved in the dust ahead, and the ground began to tremble. Ravik's eyes locked on it, heart pounding. Out of the haze emerged a war beast, its form towering, plated in black armor that gleamed even under the poisoned light. The thing's forelegs were as thick as starship struts, claws dragging furrows through the sand. Along its flanks, vents hissed vapor, each exhale a growl in mechanical rhythm. Its head was a wedge of chitin and alloy, eyes burning with the cold light of an alien mind. Ravik's legs wanted to run, but the terrain was open, flat, merciless, nowhere to hide. The beast advanced, each step a dull thud he could feel in his ribcage. The air around it shimmered with heat from its internal reactors. He remembered Osiris 7 before the fall, his wife and son standing at the docking bay, the promise to return. He remembered the day that promise died, when the swarm tore through the evacuation convoy and left him alone. And now here was the end of the road, a war beast sent to crush the last trace of him. The creature reared, casting its shadow over him. Ravik's breathing became shallow. His fingers curled into fists, though there was no weapon left to grasp. Acid rain pattered against his helmet, a steady ticking that seemed to mock his stillness. It roared, an ear-splitting metallic bellow that rattled the air. Reflex took over. Ravik roared back, a raw sound ripped from the depths of his chest, equal parts defiance and despair. The world froze. The war beast stopped mid-step, its claws sinking into the sand. Its massive head tilted, eyes narrowing. The rain hissed on its armor, but it did not move to strike. Instead, it lowered itself slightly, a slow, deliberate gesture. From deep within its frame came a low, resonant tone. Not a challenge, not a threat, but something else. The sound rolled outward across the battlefield. Ravik felt it in his bones before he heard the change. The distant shrieks of other war beasts faltered, then went silent. Shapes in the mist, dozens, maybe hundreds, halted their advance. In the span of a breath, the killing field became unnervingly still. Steam curled from the giant's vents as it watched him. Ravik swallowed hard, his voice rasping through the comms system. "You, waiting for orders?" The beast's mandibles flexed. A sharp metallic rattle ran through the armor plates along its neck, like a shiver passing through steel. The sound was almost an answer. Around them, the other beasts shifted restlessly, but did not come closer. Ravik's mind raced. This was impossible. War beasts were programmed, bred, and bound to the will of the swarm's queens. They did not hesitate. They did not obey humans, and yet here he stood, alive, the predator's focus locked on him. "Awaiting something." He took one cautious step forward, the sand crunching under his boots. The beast's gaze followed, but its stance remained low, non-threatening. Another step, and a shadow merged with its own. Up close, he could see the layered plating, the scars from countless battles, the faint pulsation of bioluminescent veins running under the armor. The thing was a weapon incarnate, fast, lethal, merciless. And now it was his. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it lit a cold fire in his chest. He glanced beyond the beast, where the swarm's forces lingered at the edge of visibility, uncertain. The power here wasn't just in survival, it was in command. The beast shifted again, letting out another low growl, this one quieter, almost expectant. The silence of the others pressed in from all sides, the stillness, a fragile membrane that could rupture with a single wrong move. Ravik's breath fobbed the inside of his visor as he realized the truth. He hadn't been spared by luck. He had spoken, and the beast had listened. He had commanded without meaning to, and the beast had obeyed. Acid rain slid down his gauntlet as he reached out, his palm resting on the cool, ridged armor just below the creature's jaw. It rumbled softly, the vibrations traveling up his arm. In that instant, the enormity of it hit him. If one beast could be turned, perhaps more could follow. Perhaps the swarm itself could be fractured from within. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled, not from the storm, but from the shifting mass of war beasts responding to the call. The tone from the armored giant rose again, carrying across the poisoned plain, and the others answered in unison. Ravik stood beneath it, battered, burned, but unbroken, the toxic wind whipping at his torn armor. He knew without a doubt that what had just happened would change everything. He was no longer prey. And if he could learn to control this power, the war that had stolen everything from him might finally turn. Ravik Thorn moved through the wreckage-strewn canyon with the deliberate pace of someone who had learned the cost of noise. The storm above was still spitting faint threads of acid rain, hissing against the jagged metal that littered the sand. His armor sealant had been patched twice since the crash, and the filtration unit rasped with every breath he took. Behind him, the towering war beast followed in silence, its armored claws sinking deep furrows into the ground. The image would have been unthinkable a day ago, a human walking ahead of one of the swarm's deadliest weapons, alive and unbound, but here it was, as real as the ache in his burned muscles. He didn't look back. Part of him feared that if he broke eye contact with the path ahead, the thing would remember what it was supposed to do to him. He'd been a mech pilot once, wearing the seal of the Coalition's 7th Wing, the emblem of a rising ace. Years ago, his name had been passed between outposts as one of the few who could fly a heavy-class Titan frame into a swarm cluster and bring it back intact. That ended in a single ambush, one orchestrated so perfectly it still gnawed at him in the dead of night. The swarm had poured out of the asteroid belt in numbers too dense for scanners to track. His wing was gone within minutes, comrades atomized by plasma fire, comms channels filling with static and screams. He had fought his way back to the evacuation point only to find the station in flames, the last lifeboat launching under a hail of chitinous projectiles. His wife and son were on that lifeboat. The swarm didn't miss. The years since had stripped away whatever softer edges he'd once had. Ravik learned to live with the constant burn of loss by sharpening it into hate. He took work where he could, scrap runs into dead zones, guiding smugglers through derelict star fields, but every job was another step toward the same destination. Finding a way to kill the swarm, all of it, until nothing was left but dust and memory. That goal was all that kept him breathing. Sleep brought the dreams, waking brought the work. Now he had something new. Power. The encounter hours earlier, when the armored giant had halted at his voice, had rewritten the battlefield in his mind. If the swarm's beasts could be made to listen, they could be made to fight for him, not against him. The thought was dangerous, maybe suicidal, but it lodged itself deep and refused to leave. He didn't realize he was being watched until the voice came from the shadows of a half-collapsed freight crawler. "You really don't know what you've done, do you?" Ravik pivoted, hand instinctively going to the sidearm on his thigh. A man stepped forward, lean and ragged, wrapped in a scavenger's patchwork of cloth and synth leather. His eyes flicked to the beast behind Ravik, then back to Ravik's face. "Came through the ridge in time to see it. You spoke, and it stopped. Do you have any idea how many corpses I've seen piled up because those things don't stop?" Ravik said nothing. The man stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You've woken something both our kind should fear. The swarm will come for you now, not just the soldiers, but the queens. And when they do, they won't just kill you. They'll take what's in you and make it theirs." The warning hung in the acid-tinged air. Ravik studied the man for a moment, then replied, his voice flat. "If they come, I'll be ready." "Ready?" The scavenger's laugh was bitter. "No one's ready for that. You think you can command one beast, maybe two, and that makes you untouchable? They'll drown you in thousands. They'll make your own weapons tear you apart." Ravik turned away, continuing down the path toward the rusted horizon. The beast followed without hesitation. "If they listen," he muttered under his breath, "I'll make them fight each other. I'll turn their claws on their own." "You can't win like that," the scavenger called after him. "I don't plan to win," Ravik said without looking back. "I plan to finish it." The canyon opened into a wide expanse of shattered loading bays and toppled gantries. Here, the wind carried the distant sound of other war beasts moving across the flats, their steps too far to be immediate threats, but close enough to feel in his bones. Ravik stopped, scanning the ruins for movement. This would be a place to test the limits of what he could do. The giant behind him shifted, armor plates clicking, sensing his intent. In his mind, the scavenger's words repeated themselves. "You've woken something both our kind should fear." He knew the truth in them. Every instinct screamed that whatever had happened out there wasn't natural, wasn't safe, and yet the pull toward it was stronger than fear. If he could break one link in the swarm's chain of control, maybe he could break more, maybe enough to tear it all down. His hand brushed the side of the beast's head, feeling the faint vibration beneath its armor like the hum of a distant engine. "You listen," he whispered, the words carried away by the wind. A movement in the distance caught his eye. A smaller war beast, sleek and spined, moving between the carcasses of old transports. Its gait was different, more cautious, predatory. This one, he knew, was designed for speed, for the kill. Its armor gleamed wetly in the fading light as it stopped and turned its head toward him. Ravik could feel his pulse quicken. This was the moment. If the first had been a fluke, the next few seconds would prove it. If it wasn't, if he could reach into that alien mind and pull the threads tight, then he had more than survival. He had a weapon. The larger beast behind him let out a low rumble, almost as if to warn him. But Ravik's eyes stayed fixed on the newcomer. He thought of the swarmed ships blotting out the stars, of the lifeboat burning in atmosphere, of the silence afterward. His jaw tightened. "If they'll listen, I'll make them weapons." He stepped forward, drawing in a deep breath, letting his voice carry through the ruin-strewn air. The sound wasn't a shout, wasn't a command in words, but a tone, low, resonant, pulled from the same place his earlier roar had come from. The smaller beast froze, its head tilted, spines lowering fractionally. Ravik took another step, the wind cutting across his armor, the acid rain biting into the exposed patches of his gloves. The creature didn't move to strike. It waited. A slow, grim smile crept across his face. This was no accident. He glanced back once toward the scavenger still lingering at the canyon's edge. "You were right," he said, voice carrying over the distance. They should be afraid. With the shadow of two war beasts flanking him, Ravik turned toward the deeper wastelands of Osiris 7. There were more out there, faster, stronger, deadlier, and he intended to find them all. The ruins of Osiris 7's central sector stretched before Ravik like the ribs of some ancient carcass, broken towers jutting into the green-tinted sky, their steel bones eaten by decades of acid rain. This place had once been the beating heart of commerce, but now it was nothing but shadow and echo. Somewhere in those shadows, another war beast prowled, smaller than the armored giant that followed him, but built for agility. Its chitin plated with serrated ridges meant to slice through flesh and armor alike. He had tracked it for hours, watching it from the cover of collapsed bridges, waiting for the moment it would be close enough to test his voice again. When it finally emerged into the open, moving between the skeletal remains of cargo haulers, Ravik stepped forward. The larger beast behind him rumbled in warning, but he ignored it. He drew in a breath, letting the tone resonate deep in his chest before releasing it, a layered sound that thrummed through the air like the vibration of a massive engine. The smaller creature froze mid-step, its head tilting, claws flexing. But this time something went wrong. The tone didn't stop at the beast. It rolled out farther, invisible but tangible, rattling the metal frames of distant towers. Somewhere beyond sight, an array of abandoned comms dishes caught the frequency and spat it back into the poisoned sky. Within seconds, Ravik's helmet comm filled with static, then with fractured bursts of alien chatter. On the horizon, an Imperial relay spire crackled as its signal died. He had disrupted the swarm's communications grid, and if he could hear them, they could hear him. Footsteps crunched behind him. Ravik spun, rifle halfway to his shoulder, but it wasn't a soldier. A man in a torn infiltration suit stumbled out from the shadow of a crushed shuttle, wrists bound with frayed synth cord, eyes sunken. His voice was a rasp, as if the desert had stripped it bare. "You don't know what you've just done." Ravik kept the rifle up. "You're human." The man gave a hollow laugh. "Was. Once. Now I'm just what's left after they're done with you." He staggered closer, the scent of charred fabric clinging to him. "I used to be an agent, deep cover inside the swarm's outpost network. I've seen what happens when someone, like you, catches their attention." His gaze shifted to the beast now standing obediently at Ravik's flank. "If the Queen knows, she will not send a squad, she will come herself. And when she's done, there won't be anything human left in you to save." Ravik lowered the rifle slightly, but not his guard. "If she's coming, all the better. Saves me the trouble of hunting her down." The agent's voice sharpened. "You think this is about vengeance? You're playing with a leash that wraps around your own throat. The longer you hold it, the tighter it gets." Before Ravik could answer, movement rippled across the rooftops, shapes darting between rusted spires, the glint of chitin in the dull light. The comm in his helmet crackled again, this time with a single unmistakable tone. A kill order. They had found him. A moment later, the first of the assassins appeared. Unlike the front-line soldiers, these moved like shadows, their bodies sheathed in reflective plating that warped the eye. Each carried a spear tipped with plasma, the weapon humming softly. They fanned out, circling, The larger beast growled, claws gouging the pavement. The smaller one hissed, tail lashing. Ravik's pulse spiked. If he lost control now, the beasts would tear into anything living, friend or foe. His voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. The sound froze them in place, their bodies trembling with the effort to obey. The agent stared at him, wide-eyed. "If you don't hold them, they'll kill everything here. And if I hold them too long," Ravik said, his jaw tight, "I'll be one of them." The assassin team advanced in unison, their movements almost beautiful in their precision. Ravik shifted his stance, eyes tracking each one. He could feel the beast straining against his will, the mental link, a cord about to snap. His breath came harder, his vision narrowing as the connection deepened. Tendrils of alien thought brushing against his own. Hunger, bloodlust, the thrill of the kill. The agent's voice cut through the static in his head. "Let them go. Run. Live to fight later." "No." Ravik's tone was flat, final. "Later doesn't exist without now," he gave the command. The beasts moved as one, lunging forward in a blur of claws and teeth. The assassins met them with deadly efficiency, plasma spears carving arcs through the air, but the momentum was too great. One assassin went down under the weight of the larger beast, another pinned by the smaller's talons. The air filled with the sound of metal shrieking against chitin. Through it all, Ravik held the leash tight, every heartbeat a battle to keep the beasts focused, to stop them from turning their fury on the agent or on him. The strain dug into his skull like hot wires, but he didn't let go. Not until the last assassin hit the ground and the street was silent again, except for the beast's ragged breathing. The agent was staring at him like he was something to be feared. "You're already halfway gone," he said quietly. "You just can't see it yet." Ravik wiped a smear of alien ichor from his visor. I see just fine, and I see the only chance we've got to end them." The agent shook his head, but said nothing more. Somewhere above, the clouds shifted, and the faint glimmer of a distant carrier ship slid into view. Ravik knew what it meant. More would come, and they wouldn't underestimate him again. He turned toward the shadowed streets beyond the square. The beasts followed, one on each side, their massive forms casting long, jagged shadows in the acid light. His body ached, his mind throbbed from the strain, but the fire in his chest burned steady. If this was the cost, so be it. Stopping now would mean letting the swarm heal, regroup, and return stronger. Stopping now would mean betraying the dead, who had no voice left to fight. He couldn't do it. As they moved into the ruins, his voice was little more than a whisper, but the beasts heard it all the same. "We're not done, not until there's nothing left of them." And in the green haze of Osiris 7, that vow carried farther than the wind. The outer shell of the hatchery loomed ahead like a fortress grown from bone and steel, its curved walls pulsing faintly with the heat of the incubators inside. The air was thick with the stench of nutrient sludge and the low, constant hum of generators feeding the queen's brood. Ravik crouched in the shadow of a collapsed gantry, the two war beasts at his side shifting restlessly, their eyes locked on the gates ahead. Beyond those gates lay the spawn chambers, rows upon rows of egg sacs, each one the size of a man, each one destined to hatch into a killer. He had studied the patrol patterns for hours, marking the rhythm of the guard beasts and the insectoid handlers. Timing mattered. The swarm didn't tire, but it did rotate, and there were moments, brief, razor-thin windows, when a gap appeared. Now was one of them. Ravik gave the low, resonant tone that meant move, and his beasts slipped forward, their massive forms blending into the shifting shadows of the refinery ruins. The gates were open, venting out humid, egg-scented air. They slipped through without a sound. Inside, the hatchery was a labyrinth of stacked incubators, each glowing faintly from within. Green light bled across the slick floors, reflecting off his armor in warped shapes. The sound here was worse. Wet, organic murmurs from within the eggs, the slow beating of something almost ready to be born. He moved quickly, directing his beast to hold position at each intersection. They were his knives in the dark, clearing a path to the central chamber where the master incubator would be. Destroy that, and the cycle here would shatter. He was 3 corridors in when the air changed. A sharp tang cut through the warm, heavy atmosphere, metallic and electric, like the scent before a lightning strike. His beast stiffened, claws scraping against the floor. Then it stepped into view. The Tao beast was unlike the others, a lean, predator-built frame sheathed in segmented armor that gleamed like obsidian, every edge honed to a blade. Its limbs were longer, built for both speed and precision, and where the others had eyes of burning amber, this one's were a deep, unnatural crimson. Ravik knew the type. Elite guard stock. Programmed, not just for combat, but for one purpose: absolute obedience to the Queen's voice alone. No outside command could breach that code. The Tao beast hissed, a serrated sound that made the air seem to cut. It lowered its head and advanced, the sharp edges of its armor catching the green light. Ravik gave his command tone, the deep sound that had bent other beasts to his will. The Tao beast didn't even hesitate. It kept coming, accelerating. He fell back a step, mind racing. This wasn't like the others. The Queen's programming was deep, layered, reinforced with kill triggers that would override any conflicting order. If he wanted it, he would have to break that code entirely. His beasts surged forward to intercept, but the Tao beast moved like water over glass. One slash in it sent the smaller beast skidding into a wall, armor torn. The other lunged, only to have its forelimbs sliced open to the bone. Ravik's breath came faster. If he let this thing cut down his beasts, they'd be cornered in minutes. He had one chance. He stepped into the fight, planting himself between his wounded beast and the Tao. His voice rose. Not the pure command tone, but a blend, half his own human roar, half the guttural bass of his beast's calls. The sound echoed through the hatchery, bouncing off metal and bone. His beasts picked it up instantly, their gurgling growls weaving with his voice, layering into a frequency that made the air vibrate. Ravik pushed harder, forcing the tone higher and deeper at once until his throat burned and the edges of his vision went dark. The Tao beast hesitated mid-strike, head twitching as if trying to shake something out of its skull. Ravik took a step forward, still roaring, feeling the vibration in his chest align with the answering calls of his beasts. "Malakatao! Nagatao!" he shouted, the human words like a knife point in the middle of the resonance. The Tao staggered. Its claws scraped the floor, armor plates shivering in tiny convulsive ripples. It let out a keening sound, not the sharp hiss from before, but something deeper, confused. Ravik pressed the advantage, pouring everything into the sound, into the link. He could feel it, like his mind brushing against the surface of an alien ocean, cold and vast and hostile. He forced his way deeper, pushing commands not as words but as raw intention. Stand down. Stand. Submit. Mine. Blood filled his mouth. It took him a moment to realize it was his own. The strain was rupturing vessels in his throat. His knees threatened to give, but the Tao's eyes flickered, crimson shifting to amber, then back, then to amber again. It dropped to one knee. The silence after was deafening. His beasts stepped forward, flanking the subdued Tao, their breathing heavy. "Ah!" Ravik staggered, one hand braced on the slick floor. He'd done it. But the victory felt wrong. His vision swam, the edges pulsing with strange color. His left arm throbbed, and when he looked down, his breath caught. The veins beneath his skin were no longer the dark red of human bloodlines. They glowed faintly blue-green, the same hue as the bioluminescent veins in his beasts. The Tao beast lowered its head fully, the gesture unmistakable. It was his now. Ravik wiped the blood from his mouth and forced himself upright, ignoring the burn in his muscles and the strange, cold pulse in his veins. There was no time to think about what the change meant. They still had eggs to destroy, and the swarm would already know something had gone terribly wrong in their hatchery. He met the Tao's gaze and gave the smallest nod. "You're mine now. Let's finish this." The beasts turned together, moving deeper into the heart of the hatchery, their massive forms casting jagged shadows against the glowing walls. Behind them, the hum of the incubators continued, oblivious to the war that had just shifted inside its walls. And, inside Ravik himself, the hatchery lay in ruin behind them, its incubators split open, nutrient gel hissing into the toxic air. Ravik stood among his beasts, chest heaving, when the ground trembled in a way that was deeper than any war beast's footfall. It was a pulse, rhythmic, alive. The sky above the shattered spires darkened, not from a storm, but from a vast shadow descending through the green haze. The swarm's soldiers pulled back in perfect unison, forming a corridor of stillness. At the far end, through the stench of burning flesh and ruptured eggs, she came. The Queen was not merely larger, she was architecture. Her body was a cathedral of bone and chitin, crowned with spines that pulsed faint blue light. Every movement of her limbs was slow, deliberate, and every step sent tremors deep into Ravik's bones. Behind her, something even worse followed, a beast unlike any he had ever seen. It dwarfed even the Tao, a construct of armor and sinew, its skull crowned with antennae that pulsed in harmony with the Queen's spines. It didn't need to be told what it was. The Thu Twitty-Twing, the apex creation. The one beast designed not to fight for the Queen, but to think with her, to be her second mind on the battlefield. Its gift was as dangerous as its strength. It could take back any beast stolen from her will. And she had brought it here for him. As they advanced, the beasts at his side shifted uneasily. The Tao let out a warning hiss, and even the armored giant behind him lowered its head. One by one, he felt the bonds in his mind tighten, strain, then fray. The Tho, Tai Dong's gaze swept over them like a net pulling back its catch. Inside his skull, a pressure built, like claws scratching at the edges of his thoughts. The Queen's presence was unmistakable now, a voice without words pressing against his mind, full of contempt and inevitability. His beasts began to step toward her, their obedience slipping from his grasp like water through his fingers. Ravik clenched his jaw, forcing the command tone into the air, but it wavered. The Duo, Twy, Dio, Dong growled, the sound resonating in his bones, and his beasts froze, not for him, but for her. The bond was unraveling. He had seconds to decide. He could fall back, retreat into the ruins, save himself, and perhaps rebuild this small force before they were all taken. Or he could do the thing he had avoided since the day he first realized what his voice could do. He could open the link fully, not just to one or two beasts, but to all of them at once. Merge his mind into the network of alien instincts and predator impulses, become the voice in every skull simultaneously. The thought made his stomach clench. He knew what it would cost. If I do this, he thought, there will be no Ravik Thorn. Only a beast wearing his face. The Queen's shadow fell across him. A Twy, Thung's antennae flared. His Tao took a step toward her. Ravik closed his eyes. He saw the convoy burning, heard the screams from the evacuation bay, saw the lifeboat with his family vanish into fire. The swarm had taken everything from him. Now he could take everything from them. He drew in a breath and let go of the last barrier. The world went white. The link slammed open, and his consciousness flooded outward. He was no longer standing in one place. He was everywhere at once. He saw through the eyes of the Tao, through the compound vision of the armored giant, through the skittering perspectives of the smaller hunters. He felt the chemical hum of their blood, the tension in their muscles, the electric charge of their rage. Their instincts clawed at him, trying to pull him under, but he forced his will into them like a burning brand. Mine! The Tao Twy Tongue reared back as the wave hit, its antennae snapping in pain. The Queen herself shifted, her spines dimming. Ravik pushed harder, sending the resonance not just as a command, but as a pulse that matched the beast's own hunting rhythms. The frequency built in the air, shaking dust from the ruins, turning the very ground into an amplifier. Beasts that had been stepping toward the Queen stopped, their heads turned back toward Ravik. One by one they lowered their bodies into a crouch, not in submission to her, but to him. The link deepened. He felt their hearts beating, their hunger merging with his rage, until there was no seeing between them. The Queen's voice hit him then, pure venom in his mind. You cannot hold them. They will consume you. Let them try, he thought back, and sent the kill order. The battlefield exploded. His beasts moved as one, an avalanche of claw and armor tearing into the swarm's lines. The Tao was a blur of blades, its claws shearing through chitin and steel. The armored giant smashed through ranks of soldiers like a siege engine, leaving nothing but pulp in its wake. Smaller hunters swarmed up the walls of the hatchery, dragging defenders down into the blood-slick streets. The Toom roared and leapt into the fray, its bulk colliding with the armored giant in a thunderclap of force. Ravik felt the impact in his own ribs, the taste of iron in his mouth. He channeled every beast around them into the fight, surrounding the Thung, driving it back with a tide of fangs and fury. The Queen tried to retreat, her spines dimming further, but Ravik turned part of the swarm toward her. He felt her shock as her own creations leapt at her, their claws raking the throne flesh sheathed over her torso. She fought back, her mind a hurricane of commands, but Ravik's way was stronger now, fed by the collective will of every beast he controlled. The sky was red with blood spray. Metal from shattered armor clanged against the stone as bodies fell. The air was thick with the chemical tang of ruptured bile sacs and the ozone stink of burned chitin. Ravik stood at the center, barely human now, eyes glowing faintly blue-green, veins lit like rivers under his skin. The beasts' breaths were his own, their roars, his voice amplified 100-fold. Every movement was mirrored across the army, every strike was his will made flesh. When the Tochitung finally fell, crushed under the weight of the Tao's claws and the armored giant's final blow, the sound it made was almost human, a howl of something that understood it had lost. The Queen gave one last mental scream, a tearing static that ripped through the link, then went silent as his beasts descended on her. When it was over, the battlefield was still except for the slow drip of blood from shattered walls. The green sky above seemed darker now, as if the planet itself had dimmed to match the carnage below. Ravik stood amidst the bodies, the pulse of 100 beasts still thrumming in his skull. Somewhere, deep inside, the part of him that had been only human was quiet, watching, uncertain if it could ever come back. But the war was not over, and he had an army. The battlefield was quiet now, the kind of silence that came only after everything worth screaming about had already died. Smoke drifted from the shattered hatchery, curling into the green-tinged sky. The queen's body lay in pieces across the cracked stone, her massive torso torn open, her spined crown shattered, ichor pooling around her like an oil slick. The Thu Tui Thung was a ruin beside her, its armor plates split like the shell of a crushed insect. Around them, the swarmed soldiers were scattered carcasses, their lifeless forms slowly cooling in the toxic air. Ravik stood in the center of it all, breathing with the slow, steady rhythm of the beast that surrounded him. The link between them still pulsed, the thrum of their hearts echoing inside his own. His eyes reflected the faint blue-green glow of their veins, though now a burnished gold shimmered at the core, like molten metal catching the light. When he spoke to the beast, quiet, low, it was no longer a man's voice. It carried the resonance of the pack, a deep growl woven into each word. The people of Osiris 7 emerged cautiously from the ruins. Survivors who had hidden in the deepest bunkers or in cellars beneath collapsed buildings now stepped into the open. They stared at him, not with cheers, but with the kind of wary awe usually reserved for storms, forces of nature that saved you one day and destroyed you the next. He had freed them, yes, but at the cost of becoming something they could never understand. The Tao stood to his left, claws still slick with the queen's blood. The armored giant loomed behind him, silent, its breathing slow. The rest of his beasts ringed the plaza, forming a living wall between him and the onlookers. Not one survivor dared cross the invisible line. Even the wind seemed to hesitate before slipping through the gap. A small voice broke the stillness. Ravik turned his head slightly and saw a child, no more than 8 years old, standing at the edge of the crowd. Her clothes were torn, face streaked with soot, but her eyes were steady. She took a hesitant step forward, glancing nervously at the beasts before fixing her gaze on him. "Chu," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Kovik mng." For a moment, the question hung there untouched. Ravik's mind turned over the words, not because he didn't understand them, but because he did. Home. It was a word he hadn't allowed himself to think about in years, not since the day the swarm burned it out of existence. He thought of his wife's smile, his son's small hands gripping his fingers, the warmth of the life he'd lost. That home was ash now. He stepped toward her, the beasts parting just enough to let him pass. Their eyes followed him, but they did not move. When he reached her, he crouched down so they were level, the faint golden glow in his gaze catching her reflection. His voice was quiet, but it carried the edge of the growl that would never leave him now. "N kich tu la n b p p n b." She looked past him at the towering shapes behind, then back into his eyes. There was no fear there now, only the kind of acceptance children sometimes gave to things they couldn't change. She nodded once. Ravik stood and turned back to his beasts. "Oh!" They were waiting, restless, the desert beyond the ruins calling to them. He didn't need to give a command. The bond was enough. The Tao moved first, leaping onto the cracked road that led away from the city. The others followed in a ripple of motion, massive shadows sliding over the stone. The armored giant passed last, each step shaking the ground. Ravik looked once more at the people watching him. None cheered, none thanked him, but in their eyes he saw the understanding of what had happened here. The swarm was gone because he had willed it, and because of that he would never again be one of them. He had saved their world, and in doing so stepped out of it forever. He fell into stride beside the armored giant, the pack flowing around him. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of sand and distance. Behind him, Osiris 7 survivors would rebuild, carving a new life from the bones of the old. His name would pass between them in low voices, sometimes in gratitude, sometimes in fear. By the time the sun dipped behind the jagged horizon, the city was a smear on the landscape, half hidden by the heat haze. Ravik did not look back. The desert opened before them, endless and shifting, and somewhere out there was the next fight, the next threat. His place was with the beasts, his voice the one they followed, his will the only law they knew. In the green dusk, their silhouettes stretched long across the dunes, merging into one vast, moving shape. From a distance, it was impossible to tell where the man ended and the beasts began. They told the story in low voices, in spaceport bars, and on long-haul freighters crossing the rim. It was never quite the same each time, but the core was always there. The man who turned the swarm's war beasts against their own masters, who brought down the Queen of Osiris 7 and left the desert littered with the bones of her army. Some called him a savior, others called him a monster wearing human skin. To most, he was simply the beast master of Osiris 7, a warning as much as a legend. The details blurred in the telling, whether his eyes burned gold or green, whether his voice could crack mountains or simply worm its way into the minds of creatures bred for killing. But the lesson never changed. Power, no matter how pure the intent, reshapes the one who wields it. And Ravik Thorn had wielded something no human was ever meant to touch. In the weeks after the battle, traders and refugees from Osiris 7 carried the tale to other colonies. It reached mining stations clinging to asteroids, research domes on frozen moons, even the drifting cities of the gas giants. It grew in the retelling. The beasts he commanded became larger, faster, more terrible, the queen more cunning, the fight more hopeless, and in each version the end was the same. He did not stay. He walked away with his beasts into the wasteland, choosing exile over the comfort of the people he had saved. Among the whispered accounts, there was one fragment that remained unchanged because it was his own words. Days after the swarm fell, a battered datapad had been found in the ruins of the hatchery, its screen cracked but still holding a single recording. His voice was rough, threaded with the growl that never left him after the battle. The message was short. Sure, ma, hung, sure, shun, sheesh, he said. Ma, sure, fa, shun. Ni fai yan heng, ting, 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 sai yan heng, ting. Vo ting quan quan tang quan san quan. It was not a boast, not a call to arms, but a warning. Those who listened closely heard the weight in his tone. Not pride, but the steady certainty of someone who had paid the price and could not return it. The words were passed along from ship to ship until even worlds untouched by the swarm knew them by heart. With the warning came the question he had left unspoken in the recording, but etched into the memory of those who saw him leave. If you could save the world by becoming a monster, would you? It was a question that lingered long after the story ended, because no one could answer it without first imagining the moment, the fire, the screams, the choice, and wondering if they would have the courage or the ruthlessness to make it. The legend hardened over time. Children in the border colonies would dare each other to mimic the beast master's roar, their voices echoing in the narrow corridors of station housing. Soldiers told the tale before drops into hostile zones, as if invoking his name could lend them the will to survive. Scholars debated whether his control over the beasts had been biological, technological, or something stranger. And in every retelling, there was the ending image, a figure walking into the wasteland, flanked by shadows that moved like living things until the heat haze swallowed them whole. No one knew where he went. Some claimed he crossed the salt flats of Osiris 7 and found another hive to burn. Others swore they had seen him on distant worlds, his beasts at his heels, watching from the ridge lines when the fighting grew thick. There were even those who insisted he had died out there, that the desert had taken him the way it took all things. But the believers pointed to a different proof. On a quiet night when the wind was still and the sky clear, they said you could hear it, a sound carried far beyond the horizon, too deep to be any engine, too steady to be the shifting of dunes. It was a roar, low and vast, that rose and fell in a rhythm no natural creature could match. And sometimes, beneath it, a second voice, human but changed, riding the same current of sound. On one mining outpost at the very edge of mapped space, a freighter captain claimed to have seen it for himself. Passing over an unmarked desert world at night, his sensors caught movement below. Dozens of massive forms racing across the sand in perfect formation, led by a smaller figure whose shadow stretched unnaturally long under the twin moons. He swore he saw the glint of golden eyes when the figure turned toward his ship, and though no weapon fired, he dropped the ship into hard burn and never slowed until the world was a pinpoint behind him. Whether the sighting was true didn't matter. The story joined the others, another layer in the myth. The Beastmaster was still out there. The beasts were still his. And somewhere he was waiting for the next enemy worthy of them. On a far-off planet, under a sky the color of old steel, the night lay heavy over a canyon cut deep into the desert floor. At its heart, in the shadows between jagged rocks, massive shapes shifted and settled, scaled armor plates glinting in, the faint starlight claws digging into the earth. They lay in a half-circle, heads turned toward the figure who stood among them. His hair was longer now, his armor worn to the metal, but his stance was the same. When he looked toward the horizon, the beasts lifted their heads as one. The sound began as a rumble in the chest of the armored giant, then rolled through the rest of the pack until it became a single, unified roar that shook loose stones from the canyon walls. It carried out into the open desert, into the still night air, a sound that could cross distances far greater than sight. And somewhere, in the settlements on the edge of the sand, people woke with their hearts pounding, unsure why. The man listened, his eyes reflecting the faint light of the moons. When the roar faded, he turned away from the horizon and moved back into the dark, the beasts following in his wake. The desert swallowed them quickly, leaving only the memory of the sound. It would not be the last time that roar was heard.